Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this Ius Laboris webinar. My name is Isadora, and I'll be facilitating the session for you today. This webinar will be given by a set of panelists from different member firms of Ius Laboris. Today, we have lawyers from Germany, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine. Okay, that's all for me. I will now turn over to Valeria to begin the session. Go ahead, Valeria. You're welcome to start.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, good afternoon to all. My name is Valeria Savchuk. I'm a partner of Vasil Kisil Partners law firm, member firm of Ius Laboris from Ukraine. And today I have three beautiful ladies with me, three beautiful speakers from different countries. It's Maria Celebi from Turkey, also Julia Uznansky from Germany, and Margarita Yegiazarova from ALRUD, Russia. And in these turbulent times of COVID pandemic, what's not, we think that it is very important to be on track with all the changes which various countries are implying in to be more safe with people who come and go from the country. And we understand that economy does not hold still during this time, and companies want to move their people, their employees from one country to another. And during this webinar today, we will discuss three topics. The first topic will be about who can get into the country. The second topic will be what should be done by the employees to be eligible to enter the country. And the third topic will be what restrictions are applied by countries to be safe with pandemic and with COVID spread. So without any further ado, I want to give the stage to Margarita. So Margarita, what do you think? Would there be a chance to book a trip to St. Petersburg this summer to enjoy some beautiful architecture?
Valeria, everyone, hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about global mobility today. I will give you sort of input about Russia, and I believe that then we will move on with not less interesting and hot topics and answering Valeria's question. Yeah, some people can come to Russia and book a trip to St. Petersburg or other beautiful cities of Russia. We do have some places worth visiting. Next slide, please. First of all, I would like to give you sort of understanding how it's been working over the year about global mobility and Russian requirements. As you might know, the Russian borders have been closed since the very beginning of pandemic. And nevertheless, during the first month of worldwide lockdown, the Russian government created a special legal regime for foreign nationals who needed to enter Russia. And that was super quick, especially considering the existing a legal system of Russia, which requires, sometimes quite long consideration. But this question was resolved quite quickly. And over the years, this legal regime has been adjusted according to the development situation across the globe. Currently, there are 29 countries whose citizens may enter Russia based on regular visas, meaning that people from these 29 countries, they can get visas, obtain work permits, and come to Russia more or less as usual. Of course, keeping in mind and subject to the certain formalities, which we will discuss later on topics 2 and 3. Others need to comply with a special personalized approval procedure. And this procedure was specifically designed to allow foreigners from out of the list countries to come to Russia. And although this procedure is quite complicated and quite burdensome, it's still possible and still feasible. On the slide, you may see that this procedure is based on the applications of the Russian state bodies. It means that only a state body can initiate the procedure of approval for a foreign national to come to Russia, which can sound quite scary, but in practice, that's really feasible. It takes some time, and you need to have very justifying grounds to come to Russia. But we have successful cases showing that this system works. And the system may slightly differ depending on the type of visa, and this procedure is applicable to work and business purposes visas to Russia. So if you want to come with touristic purposes and you are not on the list of countries with whom we have open borders, then unfortunately the Russian government will not give you a permit to enter Russia, but for business or work purposes, it's still possible. And earlier, foreigners already having valid visas, could only obtain single entry approval to Russia. And in practice, this meant that, for example, highly qualified foreign experts, they could enter Russia only once, and they would need to stay in Russia for the whole period of lockdown. That was not convenient. And of course, frequently business traveling required entering a living country and not staying in it. But the chances that the same foreign national would get approval one more time was really very low. And the good news of the last couple of weeks is that now highly qualified foreign experts having valid visas, they can get multiple entry permission and they can travel to Russia and from Russia quite comfortable now. One more general rule is that in order to enter Russia, foreigner needs to have a negative 72 hours old PCR test, which is, I think, quite general for almost all countries around the globe. So as described, you may see that it's not super simple to come to Russia during the pandemic, but I believe nobody expects global mobility to be simple these days. However, it's still possible, and the regulation is developing according to the speedy changing situation, aiming at really responding to the global mobility needs. Although to the possible extent and maintaining this improving environment. And now I believe we can switch to questions, because we do have differences in jurisdictions, and I would like to ask Maria how the things are going in Turkey, and in particular, does Turkey require any documentary evidence before entry, like tests or any COVID passports or something?
Thank you, Margarita. Turkey is a bit of an outlier, I think, internationally, in that we don't have particular nationalities that are barred. We don't have particular categories that are barred. In fact, believe it or not, Turkey is open for tourism, and there are some hardy tourists that are still coming. But we do have some documentary requirements, which makes sense. Just like most other countries, 72-hour PCR test, a negative PCR test that's proven to board the flight. And we do have a new entry document that needs to be also filled out online within 72 hours. And that's more of a tracking purpose. Turkey actually has done a fairly good job in the tracking, PCR COVID tracking. So that's for every individual to have, because once you enter the country, we have another tracking system called HES that I'll talk about later. But yes, Turkey does have few documentary requirements, but other than that, it's quite open outside of a list of countries that changes: Brazil, India, South Africa right now, that would end up having a quarantine requirement. But outside of that, there really are no restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My next question goes to Ukraine. And Valeria, could you please give us an input? Who can enter Ukraine during the lockdown period? I mean, from different countries.
Yeah, basically everybody can enter Ukraine this time because at the beginning of the pandemic, we also closed our borders to almost every citizen of every country. But after that, within a few months, we opened our borders, and people can come and go from the country. Especially we have many countries with whom we have non-visa regime, and it is still actual. And for example, citizens from EU countries and from America and other countries can come to Ukraine even without the permit, I mean work permit, residence permit, and so on. But of course, there are some work which needs to be done before a foreign citizen comes to Ukraine. Also, the 72 hours negative PCR tests should be done, and also an insurance. The foreign citizen should have an insurance also against the COVID. And both these documents should be presented to the borders officers upon the arrival.
Yeah, thank you. Could you please also let us know whether any special permits, I mean, in terms of COVID things, except for PCR tests is needed or are needed or not?
No. Basically, even the PCR test is not the obligatory document. For example, when one wants to enter Ukraine and does not have a PCR test, he or she may do the test in airport in Ukraine upon arrival, or he or she may also go on the self-isolation for 14 days. Even without this PCR test.
Yeah, clear. Thank you very much. Julian, I've got some questions to Germany. Could you please comment on whether it's able to enter Russia from non-EU and EU countries? What is the regime right now?
Right. So unlike in other countries, Germany is not open, and there's a very differentiated set of rules that you need to look at. And as probably with every country, you do need to look at that regime pretty closely before you travel, because it can change on the daily. So very generally, there are three categories according to which you can or cannot travel to Germany. Travel within the EU is pretty much possible, with the exception of virus variant areas of concern, long term which Germans use for that, which I will get to in a second. Traveling from third countries, as in from non-EU countries, is a little bit more difficult. So you've got the lucky few who, where you can travel from pretty freely, of course, observing the general visa requirements. And that's Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and Thailand. Also, persons who can generally travel into the country are German citizens and EU citizens and their close family members. If you are a resident of a third country, however, and you do not fall within these previous categories, then you can only travel to Germany if your travel is absolutely necessary. For example, if you're a medical professional, or also some skilled workers fall into that category, or if you're traveling for family reunion purposes, you can also travel. What I just want to say something regarding virus variant areas of concern. Again, I will just refer to them as virus variant areas. Those vary, again, basically on the daily. Currently, we have one virus variant area in Europe. That's one particular region of France. Otherwise, some of the major areas designated as virus variant areas are South Africa, India, and Brazil. And if you're traveling, if you're intending to travel from there, you need to be aware that that's going to be really difficult. You can travel, of course, if you're a German citizen or if your close family members are traveling with you. But otherwise, even for persons, you are also able to travel to Germany when you have a right of residence here and if you've actually established residence here. But outside of those categories, there are only very few exceptions. So you want to check really carefully if you're going to be able to travel, because you might fall under the travel ban otherwise.
Thank you very much. So now I'll pass my floor to the next speaker so we can discuss the next phase of experiencing global mobility. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Margarita. I think that's me then, Valeria, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true. Can we get slides? Thank you. Okay, Julia. What we need to do to actually enter Germany, PCR tests, vaccination.
Right, so we've talked a little bit about immigration already. We've heard some things about quarantine and testing already. So I want to go a little bit deeper into the topic of what do you need to do to actually enter Germany when you're basically standing at the border and you're ready to enter. So there are three categories. You know, Germans like their categories that you really need to look at. That's registration duties, testing obligations, and quarantine obligations. What you need to know sort of as a first step in order to understand these categories is that in terms of COVID risk, the German government has designated three types of areas. That's risk areas, high incident areas, and virus variant areas. You can look these up on the daily on the website of the Robert Koch Institute. I've linked you the website and the slides, which you can look at later. And there you can also find rules on which what COVID test you need to get if a COVID test is required for you to enter the country. So regarding registration duties, for Germany's example, you do have a mandatory registration duty prior to entry if you've stayed in any kind of risk area within 10 days prior to entering. So you just need to go on the website that I've linked there, einreiseanmeldung.de, and you need to register before you enter. Regarding testing, again, there are different categories. New categories have just recently been introduced, so this is also something you want to check before you travel. If you're traveling by plane, you always have to present a COVID test to the airline prior to flying. If you've stayed in a risk area within 10 days prior to entering Germany, then you also, for example, if you're traveling by car, also have to present a COVID test, either 48 hours, you have to be able to present a COVID test, which is not very old, so it has to be taken a maximum of 48 hours prior to you entering Germany, or within 48 hours after entering. The last category is if you're traveling from a high incidence area or a virus variant area, then this is obviously the strictest category. You have to have a test conducted at maximum 48 hours prior to entering. All right, so last category is quarantine. This is where it gets really complicated in the individual case because this is governed by local law. Germany has 16 federal states, and each federal state has its own law on this. So this will be really complicated if you have someone who wants to visit different places, or who's traveling through the country, because that basically means that you have to check every single local law. They're really similar, but there are minor differences that can, as we all know, make all the difference in the individual case. Very generally, what you have to expect when you are traveling to Germany is if you've been in a risk area or high incidence area within 10 days prior to entering, you will have to quarantine at home for 10 days, and you can shorten this quarantine to 5 days if you take a COVID test on day 5. So if you're looking at this, you need to be aware that you might actually need to take a COVID test prior to entering or shortly after entering, and then also on day 5 to shorten your quarantine. If you're coming from a virus variant area, for example, if you've managed to travel here from India or South Africa, you will have to quarantine for 14 days, and you cannot shorten this quarantine. So this is the German side of things, and I'm excited to hear from our other speakers how things are in their countries. So I think we're going to start with Turkey. So Maria, if you could tell us a little bit more about quarantine upon arrival in Turkey, and perhaps also about testing duties. Do you need a PCR test, for example? I'm excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Julia. For us, as was said, starting out that, of course, there isn't a restriction on anyone per se to be able to enter Turkey as long as they have their PCR test and their entry registration. But this is where it gets a little tricky. There's a constantly changing list of countries for which, if you have come from or been in within the last 10 days before entry, you will have a quarantine requirement. So that list is changing constantly. Last week, it still had UK and Denmark on it. As of this week, we only have Brazil, India, and South Africa on the list. So what it means, when you're on that country list, you still can enter. Often there will still be flights from that country to Turkey. Turkish Airlines is a very big employer in Turkey, and so they're really trying to not restrict those flights. So people can come in, however, they will have to quarantine for 14 days at a select government selected location. And on the 10th day or 14th day, depending on the country, they will take a second test. If it's negative, they can then be released. But again, it will constantly depend on this rotating list. So I can't emphasize enough something that I think we all know in going through this pandemic, that just because your attorney has told you one thing today does not mean tomorrow when you board your flight that it will be the same thing. These lists for, I think, all our countries will change with almost no notice. You're lucky if you get notice. And so that can very much impact whether or not you're going to send a Brazilian worker to all of a sudden know that they can't work for 14 days upon entry. They can come, but they can't work. So that's our requirement, fairly simple, just the country list and then government quarantine for that list of people who have been through or come from that country. Thank you, Julia.
Maria, I think we can see quite some similarities in our different countries, I see. So I would like to hand over the mic to Margarita. Margarita, are there any requirements for foreign nationals upon entry into Russia?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. First of all, it's again PCR test, which we discussed a bit earlier. And one more thing about self-isolation regime. It's similar to a quarantine, but a bit differently. And this 14 days of self-isolation applies to those who come to Russia with work purposes, meaning that foreign nationals having HQS, which is highly qualified specialist visas and work permits, upon entry to Russia, they need to stay self-isolated for 2 weeks prior to starting any employment in the office or otherwise. And recently we got some explanations from the state body saying that if you're coming to Russia based on business visa and your journey will not be longer than 3 days, then you can skip the self-isolation, and only the negative PCR test will be sufficient to stay in Russia during this short period of time. But of course, it's worth monitoring the developments because depending on country, it may also differ. Currently, the regime is the same for all the foreign nationals coming to Russia, depending on visa type. But some time ago, there were like differences depending on the pandemic situation in the country from where the foreign nationals come. Thank you.
Margarita, and then of course we want to hear from Valeria. Valeria, what's the procedure for entering Ukraine? Do you need testing? What do you have to do?
Thank you, Julia. It also depends on the list because our Ministry of Health of Ukraine each week updates the list of countries, and there are countries from the green zone and the red zone. The red zone, there are 44 countries by this time. I believe that many of European countries are there, for example, France, Czech Republic, Poland, also Brazil, India, and some other countries. with the rapid spreadability of COVID. And in case a citizen belongs to that country, he or she should provide the negative PCR test done within last 48 hours. For everybody else, it's 72 hours, but 48 hours for these citizens, and also the insurance policy also against the COVID, covering the COVID, yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Valeria. Then I believe we can go to the next topic. Once in the country, what are the restrictions?
Yeah, Maria, it's your turn now. Could you please give us more details? What should foreign citizens do when they come to Turkey? What are the restrictions?
Great, thank you so much, Valeria. This is a perfect example of how quickly things change. So the write-up that I've done on the restriction on movement has changed yet again, and was announced to change as of 7 o'clock tonight. We're going to go into a fourth very, very strict full lockdown. So again, just looking at this presentation, we were first looking at who can apply to come. So for Turkey, who can apply? Anybody can apply to come. Then what are the requirements right after entry? And for us, it's a very small list of countries that will have to go into quarantine. And now we're sort of in the third category of, once you're either in or released from quarantine, what are your restrictions on movement? And, you know, I think immigration attorneys have had to take this on, because though this really has nothing to do with immigration per se, certainly if you're restricted from moving, it will very often impact whether or not the intended activity for that person coming in is going to be restricted. The worker that you sent may not be able to work, or may not be able to go to the work site. So we have had a curfew for the last 3 weeks during Ramadan, but as of 7 o'clock tonight, we actually will have a full lockdown, meaning there will be no departing your home 24/7, except for exempted purposes. What are the exempted purposes now? It is to be able to go during the day to pick up food, to go to the grocery store, obviously to go to a doctor, to go to the pharmacy, those main activities. We also then have a long list of exempted individuals, anything from policemen, obviously health personnel, government officers, people who work in transport, media and journalists, banking officials, people who work in agriculture, and then obviously restaurants for food delivery. So again, we basically are going into, until May 17th, a full lockdown. So therefore, foreigners coming in to work will not be able to go to a work site. Obviously, they can work from their hotel, their home, whatever, but they are very, very unlikely to be on this exempted list, because this is sort of an essential worker list. So then going on to the closures of business, we basically have those businesses that are essential, restaurants and cafe for takeout only, but obviously any sort of entertainment, sports clubs, schools are completely locked down, only online classes, and the essential things like, you know, medical clinics and services, some government offices will still remain open. We also have a restriction on intercity movement, which actually has been in place even until 2 weeks before now started. So we are not able to go from city to city unless it's a very limited set of requirements, activities, things like, again, going to a doctor, even if it's from one city to another, a funeral, if it's for an immediate family member. So very, very restricted. Up until tonight, we also had an age restriction. Turkey has been very protective of its retirement crowd. So 65 and above, we're limited from 10 a.m. To 2 o'clock only on non-restricted days. Now that at 7 o'clock, we're going to go into full lockdown, the age limitation is not relevant. And we lastly then have other COVID-related restrictions, and this is where it's also relatively unique in Turkey. Anybody who is on a work or residence permit must obtain what we call a HES code. It's a health ministry QR code that's used for tracking. Now that HES code is needed to board buses, to board ferry boats. Obviously, once we hit 7 o'clock tonight, that's going to be locked down as well, but that was needed to go into shopping centers. If you did not have a functioning HES code, you could not go into those public locations, even with a mask, even with social distancing, and keeping up that HES code has been very important for all of us who are working and living here. All these restrictions actually do not apply to tourists. So obviously there'll be businesses that are closed, but tourists who are pure tourists, meaning they have not converted to residence permits, and they're not just using their foreign passports, they have to show that they actually are in short-term visitor status. All these restrictions don't apply. They can move from city to city. They don't have any daily restriction. They can go to touristic historical locations, but of course, businesses are going to be closed and they won't be able to go to restaurants. It's only takeout. So that's Turkey in all its myriad of very, very recently changed restrictions that will hit at 7 o'clock tonight. Would love to hear from my co-panelists on the restrictions in their country. Maybe we can start with Julia. What are the restrictions in Germany?
Thank you very much, Maria. Again, we have local regulations for basically everything. So everywhere you go, you have to check what the regulations are. It could be very different going either to Berlin or to Munich, for example. Generally, however, something has been introduced that's been called the emergency brake. So if there is if the COVID numbers hit above a certain point, then national regulations kick into place for the particular place where the COVID numbers are high. So it gets even more complicated. If the emergency brake hits, the biggest thing is there's a curfew between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. There are also some local curfews, of course. Otherwise, it's important to note that restaurants are closed, there's only takeout, and particularly interesting for international travelers, hotels are generally closed. There are some exceptions for business travelers in basically every federal state. However, you usually need to carry documentation of this, so it's very much worth calling your hotel ahead of time and asking what the documentation is that they require. There's also one of the most sort of practical hints and tips when traveling here is that you have to wear a medical mask basically everywhere you go. That is inside any kind of house, especially shops. You usually now have to wear an FFP2 grade mask in most places anyway. Shops have recently opened, but you might actually need a COVID test to enter them, which doesn't apply to supermarkets and the like. There are some other restrictions that vary pretty wildly. So one of the bigger ones is that you are not allowed to meet with a certain amount of people in one place. You can usually meet more people outside than inside. So these are some snippets of the rules that apply. It's hard for citizens to follow them, and it's going to be much harder even for people traveling here to follow them. Just check the local regulations. That's all I can keep on repeating for traveling to Germany. Thank you.
Great. For Margarita, it would be great to hear in Russia what kind of restrictions on internal movement there are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, there is nothing special for foreign nationals. All the general restrictions or recommendations of Russian healthcare state bodies apply to foreign nationals as well. So this is 14 days quarantine and self-isolation upon arrival in case you come for work-related purposes. Um, I would say that you also need to wear mask everywhere you go, except for open places like on the street. You can skip the mask on the street. We also have the obligation to wear gloves, medical gloves, when you go to the shops and when you when you go to some crowded places. But there is also limitation on how many people can go in together, like 50 people at one place with the social distancing. We still have the social distancing everywhere, like meter and a half is a minimum social distancing requirement. And in case, for example, employee appears with any signs of a flu or a high temperature, then they simply should immediately go back to remote kind of work. And general recommendation is to maintain remote employment where possible, or to use these hybrid options of legal regime. And this is not exactly the answer to this particular question, but I believe that's important to mention that in Russia we have, given that we have this list of still closed countries out of the list countries, the question which we need to keep in mind is that some people from foreign countries, they cannot travel back to their countries because of the closed closed borders. And some of these people, they have the validity of their migration permits, they are expiring. And we have the special rule that currently it's extended up until June 15th. So meaning that if your work permit or visa expired while you're in Russia and you cannot travel back to your home country, then this validity period is extended until June 15. And what I see now, I believe that this term will be extended one more time, because the number of countries with which we open borders, mutually open borders, not that big. So I think the necessity of this rule remains. So this is something particularly designed to make the situation a bit more comfortable for those who cannot travel back home. I think that's it for Russia.
Well, Larry, it would be great to hear from you in Ukraine. And actually, to add exactly what Margarita was talking about is there any accommodation to actually depart late if they can't go back to their country?
Yeah, we also have a special rule that during the time of quarantine, and for now the quarantine is up to June 30th of June. And up to this time, all people who cannot go home in time, or they have their residence permit expired, they will not face any administrative liability for that, and then they can apply for extension of their residence permit even after the residence permit is already expired. So this is the general rule for all foreigners in Ukraine.
Did you still want to talk a bit about if there are any restrictions on movement once you're released from quarantine?
In Ukraine, all administrative units called in Ukraine oblast, all administrative units are divided into four categories. It's like green, yellow, orange, and red. And for now, we have 9 administrative units in the red zone and 6 in the yellow zone. And in each of these administrative units, the restrictions are different because in case the oblast is in the red zone, all is closed. Like, for example, now in Kiev, we are in the red zone and everything is closed. all shops, all malls, all restaurants are closed, only takeout. Also that transport is also not functioning regularly. You need a special permit to use the transportation in Kiev, but starting from the 1st of May, we will be in the yellow zone. That means that the restaurants will be open again and all malls will be open again. The only restrictions will be masks and gloves and social distancing.
Great. For Turkey, we don't have an accommodation for when people overstay their residence or work permit and are not able to depart to go back to their country. We had an accommodation back in August, September 2020. What my concern is that now with a severe lockdown happening, there will be plenty more countries that will not allow their nationals or residents to depart Turkey and fly back to the country. So we certainly are hoping for the announcement of another accommodation during this time period for Turkey. That would make a very, very big difference. Julie, did you want to comment on restrictions? Accommodations for not being able to depart timely?
Yes, of course. So generally what you do, and this also applies in non-COVID times, is if you're here on a visa, you can apply for, you can apply to the foreigner office, your local foreigner office, for the issuance of a residence and work permit, and that will extend your visa until there has been a decision made over the residence and work permit. So this is always to be recommended. If you're here on a visa and it's running out, you need to apply to your local foreigner office. If you're here on a visa-free stay, usually these stays are within the realm of 190 days, within 180 days. So before those 90 days run out, you need to do the same thing. Slightly specific rules apply when you are here on a Schengen visa, or a tourism and business visa. In those cases, you do need to check the individual case. So I would recommend probably getting some kind of advice on that if you're unable to leave.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time to start with the Q&A session. I would like to say thank you to all speakers, to ladies today. It was very insightful, very informative. I believe our participants will be or are very, very delighted with all the information we are providing today. And we also have a few questions in our Q&A part. One question is for Julia. Julia, how has mobility as it relates to employment been impacted by the UK's withdrawal from the EU? Are there any changes or any problems with the withdrawal?
Yes, thank you for this question. That's obviously very relevant, both, also with the added difficulty of COVID times, of course. Of course, coming to Germany is still possible for visits and specific types of business for up to 90 days within 180 days. But if you're intending to stay here longer, you do have to make sure that you have the appropriate residence and work permit, which does permit you to work. There have been some allowances made for UK citizens, so it's a lot easier overall for UK citizens to obtain a residence and work permit for basically any kind of work if they're intending to come to Germany. Of course, this has changed, the travels into Germany overall, because you need to think of all these administrative difficulties if you're considering moving here, unlike before. Well, travel had been restricted very, very partially until recently, because the UK was considered a virus variant area, and therefore, there was a major travel ban with only very few exceptions on people traveling from the UK, including, of course, UK citizens. So it's only really now that the UK is not considered a virus variant area anymore that these things are picking up again. So to conclude, yes, there has been an impact, of course, especially of administrative nature for any kind of business or business travel or travel for longer term work from the UK to Germany. And unfortunately, it is going to stay that way, I believe, because it is just that administrative burden placed on UK citizens.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julia. And we also have one question for Russia. Margarita, can the expats, family members enter the country on the basis of their visa or their work permit?
Yeah, thank you, Valeria, and thank you to those who asked this question, because it's really very good and very important question. Because when we're discussing closed borders and all the limitations, primarily we think about those people who need to come here for business or for work, and so family thing does not appear like a first thing to think about when we're talking about entering country, but I believe that's really very important. And I think that leaders from other countries should also comment on this, because it's not only about Russia and families of experts coming to Russia, but it's like very global issue. And initially that was quite difficult thing, because only family members of highly qualified foreign nationals who has valid work permits and visas, wives and kids could come to Russia. And that was not very comfortable for people. At the very beginning, only those people who has visas can come without their families. Then, like 3 or 4 months after the start of pandemic, when we started developing this regulation about the special regime for foreigners, the government added close relatives to the list of people who come. And now we have like extended list of close relatives, basically the first circle of relatives, excluding grandparents. Hopefully they will add grandparents, because some people need to have their grandpa or grandma when they come into Russia for different reasons, which we'll not discuss here today. And this rule applies to highly qualified foreign nationals, which is basically foreign national employees, and also for those people who can come to Russia based on a service visa, official visa, how we call it. And basically these are diplomatic mission people and some government government employees, like officers and that kind of people. So basically the answer is yes, but relatives of the limited list of people. And the second question related to this is whether a foreign national can come to visit your close relative who is Russian, which is not exactly, but I think it's related. So if a foreign national has a close relative in Russia who needs some support or care, and if nobody in Russia can help this close relative of foreign national, then a foreign national can have the special permit to come to Russia, given that in Russia he has Russian national close relative, and that's good. And here is also first circle of relatives excluding grandparents, but we're talking about it internally in the country, that it would be good to include grandparents also, because this is actually the first group of people who need support and help during this time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Also for Margarita, also a question for Maria. Can we also ask if restricted the type of vaccine acceptable? Sorry, I'm missing here the line. The question is about vaccination and how one person can evidence that he or she is vaccinated to enter the country?
Yes, so the reason why I asked this question is I think all our countries are going to be entering into a mode where they'll be moving away from proof of negative PCR to proof of vaccination. So then that begs the question that each country is going to have a list of acceptable vaccines. Is your country going to accept Sinovac? Is it going to accept Sputnik, AstraZeneca, JJ, all of these different things, Pfizer? And then on top of that, each country's way of evidencing that vaccination. So for instance, in Turkey, 90% of our vaccinations have been Sinovac from China. We have a small amount of Pfizer. We have great proof of it, though, from the health ministry in the form of a QR code. So it's very high tech, very, very secure. We can very easily show any country we're entering into, any official, the QR code that will go directly back to our health ministry with our name on it, with the date and the type of vaccination. But then you compare that to the United States, which has great vaccinations, and yet I'm sure you've all seen that their proof of vaccination is a Center for Disease Control little cardboard card that they carry around. Very, very, very easy to tamper with. So the question then becomes, does anybody have any sense of, first of all, how is your country evidencing vaccination? And number two, has your country had any list of approved vaccinations?
I believe we can start with Julia.
Right. Well, of course, as Maria correctly said, countries are moving away from testing to vaccination. This has been debated in a big way here, whether or not to give privileges to people who are vaccinated. To my knowledge, it's not yet been made into law that you would need, entering the country, you wouldn't need a PCR test or a different kind of recognized test if you have a vaccination. You still need the testing at this point. However, you may be able to get other privileges if you have been vaccinated. As you know, the vaccination program here has been, could probably call it a disaster. So I think that's probably why, considering immigration law, it hasn't quite entered this debate yet, how to deal with foreign nationals who are vaccinated coming into the country.
Okay, thank you, Julia, because in our news, we a couple of days ago saw the news that EU countries will open borders for those who have the proof of vaccination in this summer. So, Margarita, any thoughts?
Yeah, in Russia, you don't need to have a proof of vaccination to come. At least for now, we have a very big campaign of vaccination inside the country, and we have some rules who can be vaccinated. But generally, if you need a vaccine, you can apply, and irrespective of your age, because we have like enough of them, and some people are getting vaccinated. But for foreign nationals, this is not something which is required to ensure entry. And even though you're vaccinated, the primary thing is that you need to have this negative PCR test. Even if you're vaccinated, we don't have any exclusions for those people who are vaccinated. But I think it's something we should keep tracking on, because we have different types of vaccines, and I believe that as soon as the number of people who are vaccinated increases like significantly, I believe we can expect some changes in the legislation adjusting the requirement of PCR tests to maybe some COVID vaccine passports with, as Maria said, like QR codes or something. I believe this may happen like in the near future, but for now, there is no such requirement here in Russia.
Okay. Thank you, Margarita. We have only 4 minutes left. For now, I will only add a few cents from Ukraine regarding the vaccination. In Ukraine, unfortunately, vaccination also is like a disaster situation because only 2% of Ukraine citizens has been vaccinated by this time. And we also do not have any rules regarding entering the country when you are duly vaccinated and what you need to show to prove that the vaccination has been made. But we also expect some changes into legislation to address these issues. So we are running out of time. I will pass to Isadora from Ius Laboris.
Thank you, Valeria. For any further questions that you might have, our panelists will remain available by email, and you can check the slides for their contact details. And for more information about today's topic, I advise you to check out our Global Mobility Series page on our website, where we have several interesting resources, such as an immigration and global mobility update that we publish every 2 months. For more information on our webinars, you can visit the webinar section of our website to find all the past recordings and to download the slide decks. Don't forget to check our podcast Talking Work, in which we talk about the world of work. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and thanks also to our panelists for their insights. So with that, this webinar will now be ending. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.